The Mark Thompson Show.
This is a thrill for me. I've been looking forward to this for some time. I've been watching this guy and in stunned admiration of how comfortable he weaves the most fabulous stories through a comedy act and through conversation. And indeed, he has had record-breaking appearances on television. Late Night with David Letterman, The Tonight Show, and opening act for Frank Sinatra for 14 years all over the globe. And he's appeared in over 500 television programs. I'm getting this from his website. And it's no surprise. I mean, you've seen him on so many different shows. And one of the reasons I like him is because he is a connection to what I really feel was show business. I mean, the show business that I grew up thinking, wow, like I'm talking Liza Minnelli, Natalie Cole, Smokey Robinson, Sammy Davis Jr., and Frank Sinatra. And his stories around Frank Sinatra and growing up in Chicago inform so much of his great comedy. But he's a virtuoso comic, and he's still working.
It's probably the best stand-up in the racket.
He's funny. Did I say that twice? Oh, good. Well, he is.
Here he is. Personal favorite among this guy, among the new comedians, is young and gifted.
Very much. You look great. That's all we need, another bright new young comedian.
Good friend of mine, a wonderful comedian.
Please welcome my old buddy,
Tom Dreesen.
Tom Dreesen.
Tom Dreesen.
Tom Dreesen.
Here he is, Mr. Tom Dreesen.
Tom Dreesen.
And to this day, people say, "Who's Tom Dreesen?" It was a great start.
All right. Put it together for Tom Dreesen, everybody. I'm super excited to have you here, Tom Dreesen. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mark. I enjoy it. I always enjoy talking to people that, especially people who love the business that I've been in for 53 years. You know,
I adore it, and I adore the stories, and I feel somehow like I wished I'd lived in that time. I don't know if that, maybe we always see it, the grass greener thing. But I neglected in the intro, and I want to do it now, and I'll mention it also throughout our conversation along the way. But you also did a book which does chronicle some of what we'll probably touch on today and those stories with Sinatra. I think it's called Still Standing, right?
Yeah, the title is Still Standing. The subtitle is My Journey from Streets and Saloons to the Stage and Sinatra. And it's just it's a retrospective of my life. And it's done real well. I as I said in the pre-interview, that I had over 450 5-star reviews, and people really enjoy the book a lot. And I'm glad, because I'm an avid book reader myself, and I like to read a good book. And I'm glad people are enjoying my journey, because there's a lot of ups and downs, and it's a story of triumph. Because in this business that we're in, and prior to me ever being in show business, I was knocked down a lot in my life. Still standing is a double entendre. Yeah, I've been a stand-up comedian for 53 years, but I've been knocked down a lot in my life, and I kept getting back up again. And so it's a story of triumph, and I hope it encourages other people to get back up again.
Well, it's interesting you say you've been knocked down. You actually started down. I mean, I think you, one of the other reasons I have mad respect for you is that you started as not a stage guy. You started, I think, as a kind of a working class guy in Chicago. I mean, you were in construction. You were in, this is all the stuff I know of your life is one of having, being a long way from show business to begin.
No question about it. I came from a family. We had 8 children. There were 8 of us, 4 boys and 4 girls. We were very poor, very poor. We lived in a shack. We had no bathtub and no shower and no hot water. It wasn't during Depression. I'm not that old, but I'm not a kid either. But anyhow, it was if a window broke, you stuck a rag in it. If you had holes in your shoes, you put cardboard in it. We were raggedy poor. I shined shoes in taverns from the time I was 10 years old. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied in the summertime. I sold newspapers on the corner, all to help feed my brothers and sisters. And none of this do I regret. But that's how I grew up. And by the time I was 16 years old, I dropped out of high school because I was going to high school. Mark, when you go to high school, everybody dresses to the nines, or people have their daddy's car and all that. And I had holes in my shoes and raggedy clothes. So I dropped out of high school at 16. At age 17, I went into the Navy. Prior to that, though, I ran with a pretty tough crowd growing up in pool rooms and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's when you
and
talk about saloons. I mean, you really you inhabited that world, or it was all around you anyway, even as a kid, right?
Yeah, there were 38 taverns in Harvey, Illinois. I grew up in a suburb on the south side of Chicago, Harvey, Illinois. There were 38 taverns in Harvey. My father was well known in every single one of them. But I shined shoes at all the bars. There were 8 in my neighborhood that I shined shoes in, and it had an effect on me because my mom was a bartender in one of those taverns, and so I would shine shoes in all 7 of the taverns, and I'd go to that tavern, my last tavern, and I would sit there and wait till the factories changed their shifts, and then I'd go back out again. But while I was in there, my mother behind the bar, my mother's brother-in-law, Frank Polizzi, was behind the bar, and he told jokes. And I was fascinated that this guy with his vocabulary, his vernacular, could hit a punchline and cause this sound to come out of everybody's body, this laughter that filled the room like electricity and united everybody. And I was so fascinated by that I used to tell a lot of his jokes, many that should not be told on a Catholic school playground, you know. But
and
that
you
was
were you were an altar boy, as I recall, right?
Oh yeah, I was an altar boy. I was all those things in Catholic school, but anyhow, so that was my childhood.
But in addition to him giving this sort of gift of laughter, there's a popularity that comes with being able to make the whole room laugh like that, right? It's a status, I think, almost. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. But also, I love making people laugh. I once wrote a poem called "The Sound of Laughter," and I'm not going to do it for you, but it's in my book. But the opening lines are, "As far back as I could remember, or shortly thereafter, I love to hear the sound of laughter." But you know, and the other thing too, truthfully, most comedians would never admit this, but they suffer from an addiction. It's called approval addiction.
Sure.
And night after night, you're going out there for approval, and when they're laughing, that's about the greatest approval you could possibly get, you know, other than a parent telling you they love you, you know.
Sure, and it's interesting, and so many that didn't get that parent telling them I love you seek comedy or seek the stage to sort of make up for that void. I see what you mean. As a kid, you know, these impressions they stay with you, and so you from that background never would have connected you to this amazing rise in show business. When was the first time you actually took a stage as a stand-up?
Well, but I wanted to complete one thing. At age 17, I went in the Navy. I spent 4 years in the Navy. I got a high school diploma from the Navy. I went to junior college nights, and I started reading books all on how to improve the mind. Way back to Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking, A Guide to Confident Living, Maxwell Maltz, Psycho-Cybernetics, Joseph Murphy, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind. And I started applying those sciences to my life. But I get out of the Navy. I got a wife. I get married. I have one child, another child. Pretty soon I have 3 children. I'm doing construction work. I'm a Teamster. I'm loading trucks. Then I dropped my Teamster card. I became a foreman of these 48 guys that I used to work with. I was now their foreman, which was another story in itself. But I was a bartender and at nights. And so I was just wandering aimlessly. And I actually got to the point where I'd be in a bar with my buddies some nights. At 2:00 in the morning, I'd look around and say, I don't belong here, but I didn't know where I belong. And Mark, I honestly started praying. I said, God, what is it I'm supposed to be doing? I joined the JCs, a civic group. JCs were young men of action in those days, and they worked on community problems. And by working on the problems of the community, you learn how to serve on a committee, how to chair a committee, subcommittees, how to conduct a meeting, Robert's Rules of Order. And I started working on problems of the community. One of the biggest problems in those days, as today, were our young people and drugs. So I wrote a drug education program teaching grade school children, 8th graders, the ills of drug abuse with humor, a concept I had: play some music, do some funny things, get them laughing, and then plant the seeds of the ills of drug abuse. I wanted to get them before they went into high school. In many cases, we were too late even at that. Now, at this time, and I say, I'm praying, God, what am I supposed to be doing? Show me. One day, I proposed this at a JC meeting that I wanted the JCs to sanction this project, and then I was going to go into the schools. And I had a friend that was going to help me, a white guy named John DeBoer. He was going to work with me. He was in the JCs. At that very first meeting, a young black man from Norfolk State College, he was graduated Norfolk State College. E.I. DuPont recruited him into Chicago as a marketing rep, and he joined the JCs. He walked up to me afterward. He said, "Gee, I'd like to work with you on that project you have." I said, "I'm sorry, I've already got a guy." As fate would have it, or prayers answered. The next day, John DeBoer calls me and said, "Tom, I can't do that with you. I've got a new job." I said, "Gee, what was that black guy's name?" "Oh, yeah, Tim Reed." So Tim Reed and I sit down, we rehearse it. We walked into that classroom the first day, and I knew, oh, what a blessing, because the students were black and white. We had integrated classes. So the moment we walked in, two young guys, a black and a white guy, we got their attention. And we played off of one another. We played music and got the kids laughing, and we planted the ills of drug abuse. The program became #1 in 50 states and in 22 foreign countries through JC publications on how to teach drug education at an elementary school level. Because in those days, they weren't teaching drug education at a college or a high school level, let alone an elementary school level. One day, a little 8th grade girl walking out of the classroom stopped and said, "You guys are funny. You ought to become a comedy team." And the thought of a black-white comedy team intrigued us because no one had ever done that before. So we said, "You want to do it?" "Yeah, I'll do it." We didn't know what to do. We would sit down and write what we thought was comedy. Now, in those days, there were no comedy clubs in America. There were none. No comedy clubs. It was 1969. And so we had to put together an act for a nightclub. So long story short, we start working what they affectionately call the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. In Chicago, the Burning Spear, the High Chaparral, the Guys and Gals Lounge, the Cotton Club.
Had you been to those places before, Tom?
No.
Or was this okay?
No. Although I grew up in Harvey in a predominantly black neighborhood, and
Right.
I played basketball on an all-black basketball team. I played football on an all-black football team, and that was a lot of my routines that I would do in my earlier days about being the only white guy in an all-black situation. As a matter of fact, I have an album in front of an all-black audience called "That White Boy's Crazy." I'm the only white comedian ever to do an album in front of an all-black audience. And whenever people would question me about it, how could you do that? How could you go in front of an all-black audience? And I always had the same answer. What color is laughter?
Oh, that's
What's the color
that's a
of
great
laughter?
response. Great response.
So, and I trademarked that and have it copywritten and everything. That's another story about another time. But anyhow,
Tom, didn't they give you a nickname on the playground when you were playing the only white guy on a black basketball team? What was your nickname?
Spot.
That's great.
That's on the album too. Yeah. And another thing.
And that's for real. That's for real. That's not a bit.
Oh, I know. I used to do so many routines about that. We had a coach named Rattery. He was a black Vince Lombardi. And I'm on this all black basketball team. And if we played an all white team, at halftime, if we were losing, and we'd be in the locker room, and the coach would be in there, he's giving one of them. He said, Don't tell me them white boys can outshoot you. I ain't talking about you, Tom. Don't tell me them white boys can outrun you. I ain't talking about you, Tom." Yeah.
That's great. That's absolutely great.
But that was my introduction. So my first time on stage, in answer to your question, you notice you ask a short question and I give you a long.
I love it.
So the first time I went on stage, we had to go on stage somewhere at some point, and we went on stage one night. We were so scared. We had neither one of us had ever been on stage before. We wrote what we thought was funny stuff, and there was a jazz group, and they took a break, and the owner said, "You guys can go up and entertain the crowd." We got up and we went 100 miles an hour. We didn't wait for laughter. We just wanted to get through our routine. "Hi, we're the comedy team of Tim Tom. He's Tim, I'm Tom." We just drove in and we just go 100 miles an hour. We rushed off the stage after about 12 minutes. We got the owner in the corner, said, How'd we do? What'd you think? He said, Whoa. I don't know how you did. You never gave me a chance to laugh. He said, "Come back tomorrow and slow down." And we came back the next day, and I can remember like it was yesterday. One of the first lines out was something I had written. It got a laugh, and it was like a B movie where the dark clouds open up and the sun bursts through, and my whole being went, "Oh yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to be a comedian." I never turned back from that. I have to tell you this. It was a Friday night. The next day was Saturday. I couldn't sleep all night long. I had a wife and 3 kids. I couldn't sleep. I got up in the morning and I went down to the corner church where I had been an altar boy, where I sang in the choir as a little boy. And there's no one in the church. It was a Saturday morning. And I got on my knees. I prayed. I said, God, now I know what I want. I want to be a comedian. If you let me make my living as a comedian, I'll do charities. I was making all these promises, and all my prayers have been answered.
Boy, you're not kidding.
Time.
I mean, it's extraordinary. But that's that. And Tim Reed, who we saw, people may know him from WKRP, wasn't he in? I mean, that was a high profile. Is that who I'm thinking of, right?
Sure. Tim Reed was in after 6 years, the team split up. Tim wanted to be more of an actor, but it was traumatic for me because I thought Tim and Tom that was the name of our act, Tim and Tom. Sure. I thought it was going to be I wanted it to be the greatest comedy team that ever lived. It was America's first black and white comedy team, and history shows it's the last. There's never been one since us. That was 46 years ago.
Wow.
But Tim went on to be Venus Flytrap on WKRP in Cincinnati. He was on a show called Simon and Simon. He was Downtown Brown. He was on many sitcoms, and recently on a show called Sister Sister with the 2 black twins. He was the father. He's a great director, a great actor, and a great friend. We're the best of friends to this day. His children call me Uncle Tom, which is funny in itself.
Yeah.
We wrote a book a few years back in 2005 called Tim and Tom, an American comedy in black and white. And I'll give you a real quick funny story. We were on a book tour promoting the book, and we went to his college, Norfolk State College, which is an historical black college, Norfolk, Virginia. And we were going to speak to the students. But prior, they had a lunch, and I was at a buffet with 6 or 7 college professors, all black. And Tim's daughter had not seen me in about a year, Tori. And she came in, she's about 40 yards away, and she starts hollering, Uncle Tom, Uncle Tom, Uncle Tom. These professors turned around and looked at her, and I said, she's talking to me. She's talking to me.
That's a great story. That's a really great story.
She came up and hugged me. I said, honey, you don't want to shout that out at an all-black.
Yeah, that's just
she
not
said,
right.
Oh,
that's
I never thought. Yeah.
We're working hard for civil rights here. So I want to skip to, and then I'm going to double back because there are a couple of stories from your childhood I know of. And I mean, there are a jillion that you tell, but in your books and in your stand-up and even in your speaking, you do a one-man show, which I'm sick that I haven't seen. Are you still touring that at all or not?
Yeah, I'm leaving in 2 days. I'm leaving for the Midwest. I'm doing it in Michigan City, Indiana, at a theater called Uptown Social. Then I'm going into Lake Forest, Illinois, and doing it again at the John Hughes Theater. It's called The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh. It's a 90-minute show of stand-up comedy, of course. A screen comes down, and Dennis Farina, God rest his soul, introduces me on a film. And then after the film, I come out and I do stand-up comedy for about 30 minutes. Then I segue to a bar on the stage that has a bottle of Jack Daniels, which is Frank's drink of choice, was his drink of choice. And as I tell a funny joke at the bar, all the lights go out in the theater, and on the screen, Frank is singing to me. I'm behind the bar, he's singing to a bartender. It's 2:45. There's no one in the place except you and me. So when he gets to the chorus, he goes off screen and the spotlight hits me, and now the audience is in a bar with me. And I tell them, the first time I heard that voice, I was 10 years old, and I was shining shoes in Harvey, Illinois. And I take the audience from that little boy hearing Frank Sinatra on the jukebox in Harvey, Illinois, to one day carrying his coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California. So I take them on that journey with a lot of funny stories and poignant stories, but on the screen, pictures are coming on the screen and video authenticating the stories I'm telling. It's a fun.
I mean, it's remarkable. You were essentially, what you're saying is you were a fan of Sinatra growing up with him, and then ultimately you were his pallbearer. You became that close to him. You hung with him with this crowd, as I say, that I sort of think of as, legit big time show business, a Rat Pack, the Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. I only met once. And it was, it might have been in the 80s. It was for a retinitis pigmentosa telethon, and he was there. And it was a small studio in Hollywood. And, I mean, by comparison, it wasn't some huge soundstage. And I mention it because he's this slight dude. And then he comes on, and he blows the back off of the place with his voice. It was unbelievable. He can do everything, right? He could do impressions. He could dance. He may have been one of the most talented people to ever live, wouldn't you say?
No
Sammy Davis Jr.?
question about it. I toured with him for 3 years. I would sit in the wings every night. You know, like most of the time, like there's things you can do, show business 101, where people are going to teach you as you're coming into the business a little bit about show business. Sammy was a master class to sit in the wings night after night and watch this incredible performer who had been on stage since he was 2.5 years old. He was a little boy traveling with his father. They actually put him in a little drawer in the hotel room. They pulled a drawer out. He was that tiny, you know. But he introduced me to so many things in show business. You know, I just done my first appearance on the Tonight Show, and I was getting real hot. And I did a show with him called Sammy and Company, a TV show. And he liked me. He said, I'm going to take you on the road with me. And he did. For 3 years, we toured all over. And then also after that, it was Natalie Cole, like you said, Natalie Cole, Liza Minnelli, Gladys Knight and the Pips, James Darren, Frankie Avalon, Mac Davis, Tony Orlando and Dawn, Smokey Robinson.
Unreal.
All these, the reason why these acts used me in those days, that was before cable television. And so they had family audiences for the most part. And they wanted a comedian that didn't work what we call blue. You know, I had to write clean material. I did 61 appearances on the Tonight Show. Every time you did the Tonight Show, you had to do a new 5 minutes of clean material that could make grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and the kids laugh. So you develop a wealth of this kind of material. And so that's why the singers wanted me, because I wasn't going to offend their audiences. You know, when cable television came along, all these children were being raised into this kind of language, thinking it was part of a comedians that all comedians talk like that. They never heard of a Jack Benny or a Bob Hope or a George Burns, you know.
That's such a good point. That's a really, I mean, the number of platforms for comics was just so much smaller than the number of platforms now. I mean, everybody, you know, can just fire up a camera and, you know, build their own sort of YouTube feed with their own comedy. How did you end up? Take me to the moment. Then I want to get back to that, skip around a little bit, but. You mentioned the Tonight Show because at that time, the Tonight Show, for just a lot of the reasons that you've just mentioned, it became the crown jewel. Like if you could get on the Tonight Show, it would open up your world. And I'm wondering, you know, if you can just give me the before the Tonight Show life of Tom Dreesen, and then the Tonight Show, which you clearly must have crushed, and then the life after the Tonight Show.
When the team split up, I ended up on the West Coast because in 1975, wherever you went in America, people say, what do you do for a living? You say, I'm a stand-up comedian. The next question out of their mouth was, oh, yeah? Have you ever been on Johnny Carson? If you haven't been on Johnny Carson in the eyes of America, you just weren't a comedian. Freddie Prinze did one appearance on The Tonight Show, and he got a sitcom the next day. So how do you get on The Tonight Show? All the comedians began to migrate out here to the West Coast because in those days, Johnny Carson had been in New York for years. And in 1972, he came out here to Burbank, California. Freddie Prinze did one appearance on The Tonight Show, got a sitcom the next day.
Yeah, Chico and the Man, I remember.
Chico and the Man. So everybody, now we got to get out here. There was a place called the Comedy Store. There was no other comedy clubs here in LA at that time. The Comedy Store was on Sunset Boulevard, and it was the hottest place in the world to be for a comedian.
So who was, at that time, Tom, it was who on stage, who was getting hot at the Comedy Store? Like, who were the comics that we might...
When I came out, I was the first of my class to get the Tonight Show. But I was on stage every night with all these unknown comedians: Jay Leno, David Letterman, Robin Williams, Gallagher, Michael Keaton, the girl, Elaine Boozler, you know, the girl waiting tables was Deborah Winger. This is what I was.
Wild. And you were you were the first in the class, as you say. You were the hot one. You were the one who just had done the Tonight Show.
Yeah, I was the first to break out of that group to do the Tonight Show. And David Letterman always talks about him and Johnny Dark, and the comedians were sitting in the back of the Comedy Store watching me on my first appearance on the Tonight Show. And the pressure is enormous. It took me a long time when I first came out here. I hitchhiked up and down Sunset Boulevard. I was begging to work for free at the Comedy Store. And finally, I got an audition with Mitzi Shore, who owned the Comedy Store, for 5 minutes. If she likes you, she could put you on the regular schedule. If she didn't like you, it's back to Harvey, Illinois, pal. And fortunately, I got over and I became a regular. And I start working my way up to prime time. And I start pestering the Tonight Show coordinators to come and see me. And I finally got Craig Tennis one night to come and see me. He was looking at a comedy team called Bauman Eston and a new kid named Billy Crystal. I don't know whatever happened to Billy, but I'm with Mark Thompson right now. Anyhow,
Yes, well done.
so they saw me, and I got over. He said, "You're on next week." I get there next week on Tuesday. I'm all excited. I told the world, you go in makeup. They take you up to your dressing room. They bring you down to the green room. You're getting ready to go on, and they ran out of time. They bumped me. They said, "Tommy, come back next week." I came back in a week, in the makeup, up to the dressing room, down to the green room. We ran out of time, Tom, 3 times in a row. The 4th time I go there, I'm in makeup. Fred DeCordova, the producer, comes in the makeup room. He said, "I got bad news for you." I said, "What?" He said, "You're going on tonight." Now, the pressure, because 28 million people watched that show. Not only did all of America, most of America watch that show, but the buyers from Las Vegas, all the hotels watch that show. The agencies, William Morris, all these agencies, IFA, all these agencies watch it. Managers watch it. Corporate people watch it. So the pressure is enormous. I'm behind that curtain. And not only that, my mother had everybody in Harvey, Illinois watching the show. So if I bomb, I can't even go back home.
She has this is for the 4th time she has everybody from Harvey, Illinois watching, right? What, didn't you have 3 bumps before?
Yeah, there was 3 bumps before. Now it's the 4th time. And when I walked out there, when Johnny, you're behind that curtain, they're in commercial break. Doc Sevenson's playing because they're in commercial break.
Wow,
and the music stops and your heart stops. And the light comes on the screen in front of you. And that you're going on. And Johnny introduces you. They open that curtain. You walk out there. You hit your mark. And I got my first laugh. And my first joke got a laugh. And then my second joke got a laugh. Then my third. Now I'm on a roll. Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon are laughing behind me. And I got 8 applause. I finished. I said, "You've been a wonderful audience. This is my first appearance on the Tonight Show. Show business is a tough life. So if you like me, just if you like me, and you're Protestant, say a prayer. If you're Catholic, light a candle. If you're Jewish, somebody in your family owns a nightclub. Tell them about me, will you please?"
That's so wrong. You probably couldn't even do that line today.
The Jewish people were the biggest laughers of it all.
That's actually true. They probably would not get much blowback.
No, that's not. Yeah. Although some idiot today would try to find out, the politically correct police would try to find something wrong with it, because that's all they have to do. They sit in their mom and dad's basement and they're 52 years old and they're still living with mom and dad. But they say, "I know, I'm going to write that's a terrible line or an anti-Semitic line."
No, you're not wrong. I mean, it's easy to get some social media mob now. It's so much easier to be critical, and so I think you're not wrong. So after that, you're saying, and you did so well, and all those people that you just mentioned, they're all watching. All those entities, the agencies, the club owners, et cetera. And what a great way to stick the landing there on the Tonight Show. And you continue to do those Tonight shows. To the point that, I mean, you're up there. What did you 61? Is that how many you did?
Yeah, I would do 4 and 5 a year. One year I did 8 in 1 year with a couple guest hosts as well. But when you first go on the Tonight Show, to America you had arrived, but to my industry you hadn't arrived till you sat down and talked to Johnny.
Right.
But to our industry, when you sat down and talked to Johnny, you had arrived. And also after that first appearance on the Tonight Show, this is what happened. I got William Morris signed. William Morris, they wouldn't even allow me to walk by their agency, let alone get signed. But the next day, CBS signed me to a development deal. A guy named Lee Curlin was watching from New York, and he signed me to a development deal. Think about this. In those days, I had a wife and 3 kids, and my rent was $225 a month in an apartment that I couldn't hardly make payments for. The next day after the Tonight Show, CBS wrote me a check for $10,000 and gave me $1,850 a month for 1 year for a development deal. I was doing Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Johnny Carson, Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train. I'm the only white comedian ever do Soul Train. I was doing American Bandstand. I was doing Hollywood Squares, $20,000 Pyramid. All these shows, a whole world opened up to me.
Wow.
And all of us, for the first time in my comedy life, even after the years with Tim and Tom, the first time the rent was paid for a year, groceries, shoes for the kids. I could relax and write material. I could relax and not have to worry about it. Do we have rent money? Do we have grocery money?
I love that. We're talking to the great Tom Dreesen. I want to go back to Sinatra now. So Remind me then how Sinatra and you connected.
I was touring with Smokey Robinson, and we were in Lake Tahoe at Caesars, and Frank Sinatra was appearing next door at Harrah's. Well, I had worked Harrah's many times with Sammy Davis, and so I was with, show you a fade again. I was with Smokey for a week there, and on any night I could have gone over to see Frank. I wanted to see him. I had seen him perform live in a Coliseum. I'd seen him twice, and he created more excitement walking to the microphone than most people did with their whole act. The room would just electrify when he walked out before he even sang a note, you know. So I don't know why I picked this night. One night I called the maitre d' over at Harrah's and I said, I want to come over. Oh, don't worry about it, Tommy. We'll take care of you. And I came off stage that night at Caesars, and I didn't even change out of my stage clothes. I went out the side door, and Harrah's there's a casino in Harrah's. I was running over there. I'm running through the casino because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. And out in front of the casino is the vice president of Harrah's Hotel, a man named Holmes Hendrickson. And he was talking to a big heavyset guy with a cigar. When he saw me, he said, Tommy, come here. And I reluctantly went over because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. He said, Tommy, this is Mickey Rudin. Well, I recognized the name. That was Frank Sinatra's lawyer. He said, Mickey, this is Tom Dreesen. And I think Tom would make a great opening act for Frank Sinatra. And the lawyer went, the lawyer got a pained expression on his face, and he rolled his eyes. And he winked at the vice president, but I caught the wink. He looked at me. He said, hey, kid, if I gave you a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? I said, Mr. Rudin, put it this way. If you gave me a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? He said,
Yeah,
no, he said, I like this kid, you know. And a week later, they called me, said, would you do 1 week with Frank Sinatra at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City? I said, of course. I figured I'll try to get my picture taken with him. I'll hang at every bar back in Chicago, and that would be it.
And that'll be it. It'll be a one-off.
Yeah, that's. I really never thought of it more than that, Mark. And the second night I was with him, he and his wife Barbara took me out to dinner, and I can remember like it was yesterday. In the middle of the meal, he set his knife and his fork down, and he said, I like your material and I like your style. I'd like you to do a few other dates with me if you're interested. And I didn't say, let me check my calendar. I said, yeah. And it turned into 14 years, 45, 50 cities a year. And
Wow.
Coliseum's 20,000 seat arenas, 40,000 in Hawaii, flying in his private jet, staying in his home 6 times a year, riding around till dawn with him night after night. He never went to bed till the sun came up, whether we're on the road or off the road. At first, he was the boss of this tour. Halfway through, he and I were friends. And by the end of his life, he was like a father to me. I miss him every day of my life. And I thank God. And in the 14 years I toured with him, Mark, I turned down more sitcoms than most comedians get offered in a lifetime. Because every time they offered me that, I would have to think about I couldn't tour with Frank anymore. And I knew it was the end of an era of a show business that I loved. You know, Dean, Frank, and Sammy. I did Dean Martin roast. I played golf with Dean. And Sammy, I took, and now Frank. I wanted to ride that train to its very last stop.
Thank you. I totally get that. I mean, when I think of a Mount Rushmore-ish kind of show business representation, those guys that you mentioned are there. And to think that you're in the middle of it, why would you hop out? I understand it can be seductive, your own TV series, et cetera, but wow, what a tough decision to make to stay on tour with Sinatra. So I have a question about, you say that you're driving around with him all night and everything. What kind of stuff do you guys talk about? I mean, are you drinking like crazy? What is is it just is everybody so wasted that no one can remember what they talked about, or what sort, or is it philosophical, or what is it?
No, not me. I quit drinking, and I had to be very careful around because he'd say, sometimes I'd order, like, it looked like a rum and Coke, but it was just Coke, you know, and once in a while I'd have a beer, and he'd say, come on, have a real drink. You know, he drank Jack and, Jack Daniels, on the rocks, sometimes with a splash. But no, when we'd ride around together, it's interesting that you bring that point up, Mark. When I got alone with Frank in the car, riding around the desert till the sun came up, there were times he wasn't the great Frank Sinatra. I wasn't the comedian Tom Dreesen. He was a kid from Hoboken, and I was a kid from Harvey, Illinois. And that's what we talked about: childhood, family, growing up, lessons in life. It was a great relationship that we had. In the end, it crushed me when we had been touring all these years and never knowing when is it going to end. And the time came when it would, but nobody said anything. I mean, nobody said to Frank, he wasn't well and he hadn't worked in a long time. And I'd go visit him all the time. And one night I went over to see him and he wasn't well at all. And nobody
Was
ever
he in
brought
Palm
up,
Springs or where was he
no,
living?
it was here in on Foothill in
Okay.
Beverly Hills. And I went over to the house to see him, and we never brought up because you're always thinking like we're going to perform again. And he wasn't well. He was sitting down. He had like a blanket on him. We were talking. I said, I got to go. And he said, where are you going? I said, my ex-wife is in town and the kids. And he had met her and he said, oh, give her my best. I said, okay. And he said, I said to him, he always, whenever he said he loved you, he'd punch me on the jaw. And I got even a picture of it. He'd go, love you, pal. He never, he said, love you, pal. But this night, as I'm getting ready to go, he said, you know I love you, Tommy. And it stunned me because he never said that. He just didn't do that. Like I say, it's like, yeah, I love you, pal. But he said, you know, I love you, Tommy. And I started stammering. I said, oh, yeah, I love you too, Frank. And I don't know what made me say it, but I stumbled. I said, hey, get well, and we'll go back on the road again. And the moment I said it, I could have bit my tongue because and he put his hand on my cheek. He said, you're going to have to go on the road by yourself from now on. And that's when I knew that he knew he wasn't ever going to sing again. And
God, that's an intense story, buddy.
I turned around and I walked away. I went outside. I had tears in my eyes. And Barbara came out, his wife. She said, are you okay? I said, yeah, I'm fine. That was pretty rough. And she said, keep coming, Tommy. He enjoys seeing you. I got in the car and I'm driving away and I'm thinking, Frank Sinatra is never going to sing again. That's the saddest show business news I've ever heard. And
that story has a lot wrapped up in it. That's a very poignant moment, and you're right, and a significant one. You're saying from a show business and sort of the culture standpoint. Yeah.
And I'll tell you one other quick story. When he died, Barbara called me over to the house, and she told me she wanted to be a pallbearer. Now there was paparazzi out in front of this Foothill home on Foothill in Beverly Hills. As I was leaving, I was listening to a talk show, and a woman called in because everybody was saying Frank Sinatra died. Frank Sinatra. It was a talk show. A woman called in. She said, my husband fought in Korea, and he fought in Vietnam. She said, and he didn't cry at his father's funeral. But today, when he heard Frank Sinatra died, he came home, and he's in his room right now, and I hear him sobbing. She said, I don't get it. I don't understand. And the radio guy didn't either, but I did. If you were a Sinatra fan, Frank Sinatra's music was a soundtrack of your life. You went steady to his music. When somebody loves you, it's no good. You got married to his music, love and marriage, love. You got divorced to his music. You're in that bar. It's 2:45. There's no. You got remarried. Love is lovelier the second time around. His music was a soundtrack of your life. If he died, if that voice died, something inside of you died as well.
That's so profound because music does touch us that way, and it connects with different parts of our life. I think that's a great point for all brilliant singers. The thing about Sinatra is that he was such a classic stylist, and his music endured and does endure for all of these decades, that, as you suggest, it's through a lifetime. That's why the loss of someone like that is even more profound. I know we have to wrap up before too long. I kind of want to...
Take your time. I have some time.
I have a question, one more little follow-up about Sinatra, then I want to double back to your life in Chicago a little bit. The question about Sinatra is, there's this sense, and Rickles used to give him a hard time about, hey, Jilly, that's enough. That's enough. Leave him alone. This kind of guy who was almost a mobster type while also being a show business figure. And it was such an open joke. It was everyone talking about it. My question to you is, how did both Frank take that, and also was that like a real representation of who he was? I mean, were there two Franks, the one we saw on stage and then this tough mobster guy off stage? Doesn't sound like it based on what you've said.
As an Italian American, I refuse to answer that on the grounds I'm pleading the fifth. No, I tell you, did he know those guys? Of course he knew those guys. Right. We all knew those guys. Anybody who has any ounce of brain knows in that era They owned all the nightclubs. They owned the places you work. They owned they had places in Las Vegas they owned. So did you know them? Of course you knew them. Were you one of them? That's another story. But of course you knew them. And of course Frank knew them. He did know them, and they were involved in his life. I mean, it's not a secret that he knew Sam Giancana and a whole lot of other guys, and they were huge fans of his. But yeah, he knew them. Now, several times he went in front of 11 grand juries and was found innocent every time. I think a classic story that Mickey Rudin, his lawyer, told me. He said that one time he was before a grand jury and they gave some name. They said, "Do you know that the prosecuting attorney said, do you know Joe Stanucci, whatever his name?"
Right.
And Frank said no, and he had an 8x10 envelope. The attorney, and he goes, "You don't know so-and-so Stanucci," and he was ready to pull out an 8x10 with a picture of Frank in him, and Frank said, "No, I don't know him. I met him, but I don't know him."
No, that's great. That's
and the
great.
guy dropped the envelope on the floor because he knew once he pulls that picture out, Frank could say, "And last year I took 8,000 pictures just like that all over the country." So that was the one thing, the connection. But yeah, there was a connection there. By the way, and that was part of the great mystique about this man, Frank Sinatra. Aside from the fact that he was the greatest pop singer of all time, and there's no argument to that, the greatest pop singer of all time, he was a brilliant actor. He did 61 films. He won the Academy Award. He danced with Gene Kelly, for God's sake. He won the Academy Award and never took an acting lesson, in From Here to Eternity.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that in itself would make you want to go see him. But the mystique, was he connected? Was he not? That mystique also. Now, why was
You're right?
God,
It only fed the legend. You're absolutely the myth around him. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's funny. You just made me think of it. In Oakland, of all places, because we have a lot of people from the Bay Area watching and listening right now. The Oakland Arena, I went to see the Rat Pack. It was the 80s. It was their final tour, I felt, because everybody was just getting so old and it was Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Sinatra. And I'll never forget it. I scraped together my magic beans so I could buy 2 tickets for my girlfriend and myself, and we went. And Dean was first, and Dean forgot the lyrics or was meandering around. Really, it was, the audience is with him, but I mean, he was really struggling. And who came on stage? Sammy Davis Jr. came on stage almost right away, and it became sort of Sammy and Dean. And you saw how these guys were all covering for each other. And I think even maybe Sinatra took the stage quickly. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be that way. It was supposed to be each one performing individually, and then they come on as a group. Clearly, that's the way they had planned it. But as Dean faltered, the need from the other two was felt, and they stepped up. And I said to my girlfriend, I don't think Dean's going to make this tour. And sure enough, the Chicago was the next stop, and they didn't have Dean on the tour anymore. They substituted somebody else.
Liza Minnelli.
Liza Minnelli, exactly. Good knowledge.
I was there that night. I was there. Across the street from the Chicago Theater where they were performing was ABC Studios. And Oprah Winfrey went on hiatus for a week, and they gave me that studio for 1 week to do a late night talk show. A man named Joe Ahern was the head of ABC at that time. He said, "Tommy, the studio's yours for, if you do a late night talk show." I followed Nightline on ABC, and the show was called Nighttime, starring Tom Dreesen. And my first guests were going to be Frank, Sammy, and Dean. I had already talked to them. They all agreed to it. And so they were going to be my guests. So all the promotion that whole week was that Frank, Sammy, and Dean were coming on Tom Dreesen. So Nighttime starring Tom Dreesen. And the night before the show, Dean and Frank got into it a little bit, and Dean went home. And everybody said that he had kidney trouble and all that stuff, and went back. It wasn't true. They had a run-in. And so anyhow.
Wow.
I'm hung out to dry. So
go ahead.
Barbara Sinatra and Altavis Davis subbed for them. They were my first guests, and they came on because Frank and Sammy went on to New York to get Liza, to rehearse with Liza.
Sure.
Yeah, but I was in the audience that night. Yeah.
You bring up an interesting thing. I hadn't even thought of it. Honestly, it's never occurred to me, which is weird. Those guys hung out a lot together, the Rat Pack, and you were around them. They couldn't have possibly all gotten along all the time. There must have been some friction.
Well, first of all, Frank was the leader, and everybody knew that. I mean, that Sammy Davis used to sing on stage, you know, I gotta be me. He'd say, I gotta be me. I'd rather be him, you know. He pointed Frank there.
That's funny.
Yeah,
Maybe they did all get along then. They kind of knew your pecking order, and here's what you're saying.
in their younger days, they really got along great. They loved one another, and they were just huge hits. You know, there wasn't any competition, although everybody knew Frank was the leader of the group. But as he got older, you know, Frank also had mood swings, and it's not a secret anymore. You know, Frank suffered from he told Walter Winchell many years ago that he thought he was a 24 karat manic depressive. You know, later on in life, Frank was using, I think it was Alavil or something like that, a mood stabilizer. So, you know, a few drinks and here, I was a bartender for years, Mark. And when I was a bartender, before I was ever in show business, when I came out of the service, I noticed my buddies when they were drinking, they would go through one of the 3 R's. I always called it the 3 R's. Some guys, a couple of drinks, and they were Rocky Marciano. They wanted to fight everybody in the place, you know. Some of them, a couple of drinks, they were Rudolph Valentino, and they wanted to every girl in the place, you know. And some of them, they became Rip Van Winkle. They just, you know, so alcohol affect everybody differently. Frank was Rocky Marciano. A couple of drinks, and he would be, you know, he'd get feisty. And by the way, one of the reasons the staff liked me around him, and then both my parents are alcoholic. I grew up in bars. You know, my mom quit drinking later on in life, but I grew up in taverns. I grew up around drinkers my whole life. So I could see that coming on. And if I saw that coming on Frank, I'd say, hey, Frank, tell me about that time you and Dean got in the sports car. Oh, yeah. I could always change the
that's a gift,
around.
buddy. That's a gift. Yeah.
Well, I saw it coming because, again, I was around alcohol my whole life. So I could change the subject and get him laughing again and all that, you know.
Hey, Tom, when you, I was just going to go back to Chicago. You know, I've heard so much. There's the Rat Pack. We've shown some pictures along the way of the Rat Pack. That's the 3, and then Lawford and Joey Bishop are also in there, right, Tom? They were in that same orbit.
I knew Joey real well. I didn't know Peter. You know, I knew Frank disowned him at one day. He got very angry with him over the whole Kennedy episode, and so. There's a movie called,
he felt that Lawford might have had something to do with dry cleaning the whole.
And it was unfair because Peter was you're killing the messenger. He came to Frank and said, you know, how can we go into this whole thing without going to a long story? In the 1960 election, when John Kennedy got elected, there was a lot of controversy about what happened in Illinois and in West Virginia. The truth is, Frank Sinatra got a call from Joe Kennedy.
Jack Kennedy's dad,
right? Yeah, and he's an astute politician. He knew all about politics, and he wanted his son to become president of the United States. He wanted his first son to become president of the United States, but he was killed in World War II, and so Jack was the next step, and he wanted Jack Kennedy to become president. And so Frank and Sammy and Dean campaigned all over the country for them. And a few months before the election, Joe Kennedy called Frank Sinatra to his home and said, my son cannot get elected. We will lose West Virginia. It's 95% Protestant, and they won't vote for a Catholic. And we're going to lose Illinois. The downstate Republicans are going to beat us. He said, you know the guys that can change that. And Joe Kennedy said, I know them too, but I can't go to them. Because the Kennedys were bootleggers long before they were legitimate. Right. You know, and that's historically accurate. So Frank went to Sam Giancana, and they're talking. Long story short, in West Virginia, all the unions started supporting Kennedy, and he won West Virginia. And the last state in was Illinois, and those electoral votes swung the election. There was somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 or 30,000 dead people voted in that election.
Right.
And so now
that was legitimately an election that had questions around it. Yeah.
Now after that, John Kennedy was coming to Frank's home, his compound, to be there. And Frank was excited because he said to his mom, you know, he said, this is his story. He said to his mom, you know, in one generation, came from Italy, the president of the United States is staying in our home. And he put, in those days, $1.3 million, a heliport, everything. It's almost completed when Peter Lawford visited and said, Jack can't come here. And Frank said, what are you talking about? He can't come. He said, he can't come here. Bobby doesn't want him to come here because you know those people. And Frank said, I know those people. Those people his dad asked me to go to because I know those people that got him elected. And he said,
Yeah, he's right. He's
And
right.
Peter said, don't kill the messenger. But he told Peter to get out of there, and he never talked to Peter again, which was a shame.
Wow. Wow. That's a great story, boy, about Sinatra really just feeling snubbed after he had done the heavy lifting to get the guy elected.
And did all those things. One thing about Frank Sinatra that you learn, he was very, very, very loyal to his friends. If you were his friend, there wasn't anything he wouldn't do for you. He was also a Sicilian. If you worshiped the ground you walk on, or he hated you, But hold on one second.
Yeah. And then.
But however,
go ahead, no hurry.
To prove that point, wow, I got a dry spot in my throat. Hold on.
Yeah. Don't choke to death on our show, Tom. It would be a less than elegant way to end your career.
But it could boost the hell out of your career.
That's true. That's true. Thank you. Thank you for thinking that way, Tom Dreesen.
But the point is, the first time I ever visited Frank's home, they had a buffet, and the first night there was all these stars there at a cocktail party that night, and I was stood in the back, and there's Gregory Peck and Jack Lemmon and Kirk Douglas and their wives, and there's Robert Wagner and Joe St. John and Angie Dickens and all these stars, and I'm going, wow. And then there's a guy in the corner that I said, God looks so familiar. A good-looking guy, nice. I said, he looks so familiar. He must be a character actor. Later on, I found out it was Spiro Agnew. Spiro Agnew. Well, here's the point. Yeah. Spiro Agnew had fallen from grace from the sea. He was a former vice president of Richard Nixon, but he had fallen from grace from the sea and was blackballed everywhere he went. But he had been Frank Sinatra's friend back then, and he was still his friend now. Just because you came into some hard times in your life, that didn't change Frank's opinion, and that's how loyal Frank was.
That's a great story to tell on the heels of the other one, too, because Sinatra could have said, nah, it's a bad look to have Spiro Agnew here, the corrupt vice president. But that wasn't. Loyalty took favor over that, priority over that.
Friends. The last lesson Frank Sinatra taught me, he taught me a lot of lessons. We're at his home. It was his 82nd birthday. He died 5 months later. All of these stars that I mentioned, most of them were there that night. And Frank was off to the side. He wasn't well. And he was eating slow, and he had a caretaker help him. And everybody started making small talk. They're waiting for the cake to come out. And somebody said, where's the best place to live? And Gregory Peck said, well, Veronique and I have a villa in France, and we like it there. Robert Wagner, Joe St. John said, we have a place in Aspen. We like it there. And Frank, off to the side with his head down, said, the best place to live is where your friends are. And everybody went, oh, yeah. My point, here is the greatest career show business has ever known, arguably. Amassed a fortune, all these awards, Oscars, Grammys. In the end, it wasn't about any of those things. It was about friendships. And that's the last lesson he taught me.
That's terrific. By the way, tell me about Frank Jr. passed away. Is that what happened, Tom? Tell me, it was Frank and Nancy were the two kids, right?
And Tina.
Tina,
Frank,
sorry, excuse me.
Two girls and a boy. Tina runs the company now, Frank Sinatra Enterprises. And Nancy's 83 or 84. She's still hanging in there. I guess I haven't seen him in years, but
the son Frank Jr. Is he still alive? I'm so sorry.
No, he passed away. No,
that's what I thought. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
He passed away a few years back. Well, while I was on tour with Frank, the first 7 years, the last 7 years, Frank Jr. conducted the orchestra.
Oh, sure, right. Yeah.
And he was a great musician and a good singer. But how would you like to go into baseball with your name Mickey Mantle Jr.?
Thank you. Like it's just it's brutal. I mean, I always felt for the guy, even though I know he came from some privilege because of his dad, but I always felt from it, that name. Yeah, you're right. I mean, Mickey Mantle Jr., there they are, the two kids. Thank you, Kim. I want to go back quickly in our last few minutes and just ask you about some stories from your childhood, because you did come, it's a different place now, Chicago, Back then, there was a tremendous mob influence. And as you say, mobs were all in the clubs and everything. And I'd forgotten that until you reminded me of it. I know that they owned like stuff in restaurants like jukeboxes, like you couldn't, it was a weird thing. They infiltrated the tentacles of the mob were everywhere. You know, it wasn't just protection money; it was other stuff too, right, Tom?
Sure, they and they owned every bar or restaurant anywhere that had a jukebox. That in those days they didn't call them the mafia or the mob; they were the syndicate.
I
Were
see.
syndicate. Any video machines, and they put them in your bar. You know, you had no choice. Frank Polizzi, who was the owner of the tavern, was an Italian guy who came to this country when he was 7 years old. A guy that was my mom's brother-in-law, my uncle. When I was a little boy with my shoe shine box, he just opened a tavern. He had a jukebox he paid $100 for. It played 78 records. One day a truck pulls out in front. This is in my book, by the way. A truck pulls out in front. Two big guys bring a big, beautiful jukebox in. And Frank is in the back having lunch. And my mom and my aunt are tending bar. And they came in and they said, sign here, Mrs. Polizzi, to my aunt. She said, what's this for? He said, for the jukebox. She said, we have a jukebox. She said, no. We supplied the jukeboxes here. She went and got Frank. Frank comes out. He's wiping. I never forget. He's wiping his mouth off. He said, what is it, fellas? A mob guy from Blue Island, Illinois, named Babe Tuffinelli controlled all that. He said, Mr. Tuffinelli sent this jukebox over. Signed, Mr. Plizzi. He said, I got a jukebox. Get it out of here. They said, Mr. Plizzi, our orders are. He said, I don't care what your orders are. I have a jukebox that I worked in a factory 12 hours a day to build this tavern and to buy that jukebox. Get it out. And they wouldn't get it out of there. They said, we're leaving it here. Mr. Tuffinelli, Frank Polizzi put it on a two-wheeler, took it outside and dumped it on the sidewalk, and it broke. My mom and my aunt pulled out the rosary. Now I'm a little boy.
Yeah, really, that would be the kind of thing could legitimately get you killed, right?
A half an hour later, out in front, you hear a car pulls up, doors open up, three guys get out. One of them is this guy, Babe Tuffinelli. He comes in, he confronts Frank Polizzi, right toe-to-toe. You broke my jukebox? Frank said, I told your goons to get it out of here, and they wouldn't get it out. And he went toe-to-toe with them. And they're going back and forth arguing. He said, I worked at a factory, and he said, go muscle other people. But I'm Italian too. And he said, and I came here to this country when I was 7 years old. And they're going back and forth. Now, Tuffinelli finally ends the conversation. He said, I'm going to let you have your jukebox. But if you ever leave this tavern business, I want you to come and work for me. And Frank Polizzi said, I'd never work for the likes of you. He didn't like mafia.
Wow.
Said, I wouldn't. And that's where I came from. So they controlled everything. Yeah. But however, again, there's other sides of those stories. If wherever the Italians were, there was nobody roaming the streets snatching purses and writing graffiti because you just didn't do that.
Sure,
when I was growing up,
it's the line that the garbage got picked up without any problem and the trains ran on time type thing. It's a weird trade off, right, Tom?
Yeah, Well, hey, by the way, my charity in Chicago is the Illinois Fatherhood Initiative because I'm all for fatherhood in America. When I was growing up, in the black neighborhood, and the Irish neighborhood, the Italian neighborhood, the Polish neighborhood, Jewish neighborhood, we were more afraid of our fathers than we were of the police. If there was a young Polish kid roaming the Polish neighborhood snatching purses, the policeman in that neighborhood took him by his ear and took him home to his father. Said, you know what your son was doing? That happened in the black community and all the other communities. We were more afraid of our fathers. One night, I was setting pins in a bowling alley. My black friend, Everett Nicholson, who I wrote about a lot in my book, coming home, the squad car got us. Get in the car. What are you guys doing out so late? We said, we're setting pins in a bowling alley. Okay, we'll give you a ride home. Gucci, Everett Nicholson, his nickname was Gucci. He said, officer, please don't. You'll never see me on the street again. If I pull up in front of my house in a squad car, there's hell to pay with my father. Please, you'll never see me on the street again. And Gucci was a tough guy. Everett Nicholson was a tough guy. My point of that whole thing is we were more afraid of our fathers than we were of the police. In Harvey, Illinois, in 1960, 3% of the children being born were being born without a father in the home. Today, 72%. Three out of every white children in America have no father in the home. Almost 5 out of every Hispanic have no father in the home, and 7 out of every 10 African American have no father in the home. That's the destruction of America. Break down the family, and they have successfully done that with a thing called the War on Poverty, which well-intentioned but misinformed. In those days, in 1964, Lyndon Johnson passed this thing. If you have one baby out of wedlock, you get $250 or something. If you have two babies from two different men, $500. If you have three babies from three different men, $750. And by the way, if one of those men is living with you, cohabitating, you get nothing. So the government became the father of the family. Where we grew up at, the mantra was all throughout the neighborhood. You get a girl pregnant, you'll stand by her. If a girl got pregnant, when I was 13 years old, my mother said, you get a girl pregnant, you'll stand by her. I was 13 years old, but the point is, if
I guess
you
your
don't
mom
take
sensed something in your life, Tom, that you might be sexually active. Yeah.
Of course, all of us, but the point of that is that if you don't take care of that baby, we the family have to. Sure. And then the government came along and became the father of all these, and that's what, if anything is you won't destroy America from without. We're a very strong military. I'm an ex-GI. We got the greatest military ever assembled, but you can destroy us from within. Anyhow, that's the end of my.
No. I think these are good points all. And you on the one hand to build a safety net for those who need it. You don't want to always just hope that Tom Dreesen's charities have to do the work of supporting families that need support. But by the same token, as you say, you don't want to incentivize not actually, having a family or having a structure of some kind that can support these kids. I think that structure, and then we can wrap up, but I think that structure can take the form of a lot of things that, don't have to do with money, like, these community centers and pre-K stuff. I mean, this is important stuff in the development of a child. Wouldn't you agree?
Here's what I know. When I was growing up, that every Christmas and Thanksgiving in the shack that I lived in, that the Moose, the Kiwanis, the Elks, the B'nai B'rith, all these organizations would come and they'd bring baskets of fruit and stuff to the shack I lived in. And my mom, proud Irish mom, would say, no, we don't deserve that. My husband has a job. We don't deserve that. And us kids were trying to get around the door to get at the stuff, but my mom was right. He had a job and he should be taking care of us. But the other thing, it wasn't the government bringing food to us. It was people helping people. If you leave Americans alone, they won't let their neighbors go hungry. They won't. I mean, they will get together and do something. But when we keep relying on the government, all of a sudden we take away that personal responsibility. And it's my responsibility, Mark, if you're my next door neighbor and you're hungry, I've got to help you.
I think you really point to community and the power of community. And there's no question that those areas of life that involve community show the greatest support for, broken families or people in distress. There's absolutely no question about that. So how can you not support an effort like that? So Tom, you have a main website, don't you, Tom Dreesen? What's the
TomDreesen.com, DREESEN. Everybody puts an extra S in there, but it's DREESEN, TomDreesen.com. It's my website. It'll tell you where I'm at, what I'm doing.
And the charity is what I'm getting at too. Still Standing is the book that we're all going to pick up. And I'll tell you, and we'll super the name of the website too. We'll have it on screen as well, so people will be able to keep track of you. I'm so impressed, man, that you're still touring. I mean, when I say that, I mean, you've kind of done it all. You could just kick back and go play golf, but you really enjoy it. The one-man show particularly sounds terrific.
Yeah, I love show business. I hate getting there, but I'm not like a lot of comedians throw up before they go on stage. I can hardly wait to get out there. I love making people laugh. I went on the Comedy Store a couple of weeks ago with Bill Burr and Sebastian, Maniscalco.
Sure, of course, Maniscalco.
Great guys. And I just love that environment and making people laugh. It's so much fun.
Well, you're so good at it. It's also effortless for you. And, conversation is so effortless and you have so many great stories. I can't wait to get into your book. And you've given me a thrill because I really wanted to talk to you and have you on the show, and it's happened. So thank you so much, Tom, and all the best to you.
Same to you, Mark.
Tom Dreesen, everybody.
The Mark Thompson Show.